Schoenfeld, the originator of the Bible codes. But there's a lot behind this. But there's a lot behind this man that most of the world does not know. Probably of far greater importance than his work on the codes is his work that he did on behalf of Klal Yisrael in terms of rescue. Who was Rabbi Weissmandl? A very extraordinary human being in many ways. He was a Talmud in Slovakia, in Bratislava, and he became a Talmud in the Nitra Yeshiva before it came to Nitra, and eventually the son-in-law of the Rosh Yeshiva of Nitra, Rav Unger. But he was always a curious person from the time he was young. So curious was he that he took a trip in the early 30s throughout Eastern Europe to get to know European Jewry. One Jewry, he don't realize it. Hungarian Jewry didn't know German Jewry, and Lithuanian Jewry didn't know Polish Jewry, and Polish didn't know all the others. They were really strangers because we don't realize transportation was not as common when certainly transatlantic flights and so on, jet flights, were not dreamed of even. But he wanted to know the different Jewry, and you should know it made a difference. Yerkes didn't know Polish Jews, and Polish Jews didn't know Yerkes, and Hungarian Jews didn't know anybody. The fact is, Jewries were separate, and he wanted to see each one, and he got to know them. And he also got to go to England and study at Oxford, not formally, but to look for a manuscript to work on one of the Rishonim. And I still saw in an Oxford record in the library, in Bodleian Library, that he had access to all the stacks because he identified one of the ancient manuscripts for the library that they couldn't identify. He was looking for one of the Rishonim manuscript which he ended up publishing. And he became, since Rabbi Schoenfeld was one of his students in Nitra, he stayed with Rabbi Schoenfeld in London, and he renewed his friendship throughout the war. And there are many stories I'll tell later about Rabbi Schoenfeld and Rabbi Weissmandl. But to tell you more about the personality of Rabbi Weissmandl, he was a multifaceted genius. He was a genius, a mechanical genius. He was working on a perpetual motion machine in England. They wanted to give him a visa to stay in England in '39, just before the war started. And of course he decided he has to go back to his people in Slovakia. Rabbi Weissmandl was, above all, a dedicated Jew, concerned about his fellow Jews. He was the assistant to the Rosh Yeshiva, of course. He was a genius in learning. The drasha he created, he wrote for his bar mitzvah, he gave in Nitra Yeshiva in New York. And the people were amazed at what an incredible drasha. His grandfather gave him 10 gulden not to say the drasha, because he realized for a kid it would go to his head and get the adulation of all the adults. He didn't give the drasha at his bar mitzvah, he gave it in New York and Mount Kisco. This will tell you what the child genius he was. But let's get to the main point of Rabbi Weissmandl's concern for his fellow Jews. In 1938, after Vienna, after the invasion and the annexation of Austria by the Germans in March, the first Jews that were kicked out of their homes were the Jews of the Sheva Kehilos of Burgenland, Salem, for example, among others. And Rabbi Weissmandl immediately sought help for the refugees from the Sheva Kehilos, and he helped provide them with food packages from Vienna. And he made sure that the Jews, whoever could go to Eretz Yisrael, he arranged for illegal immigration to Eretz Yisrael with one boat. There were 90 Rabbanim put on a boat, sent down the Danube. He arranged for their transfer to illegal immigration with the revisionist Zionists. He worked together with them and to send them to Eretz Yisrael. And in 1938, we also know that the English, after the debacle of Munich, somehow, I guess as compensation, allowed 10,000 Jewish children to come to England. And these were known as the Kindertransport. The Orthodox children were discriminated against because the objective was, and they worked with the Zionist living heads in Vienna, because if they're Zionists, they're going to stay in England only a short time after the war to go to Eretz Yisrael. So we don't have to worry about staying in England. We don't want too many Jews coming to England. That was the idea. And the Orthodox Jews may stay in England a little longer, and so they were discriminated against. And so Rabbi Weissmandl suggested to Schoenfeld, he suggested also to Mr. Julius Steinfeld in Vienna, who was a great Askin, that they should organize children's transport for the Orthodox. So in December 1938, Rabbi Weissmandl instigated the beginning of the kinder transports that went to England, and that part goes to the lecture later on. But going back to Rabbi Weissmandl, he was involved in rescue from 38 on until after the war. Of course, everybody knows about his famous fleet about Auschwitz. I'll tell you about it in a few more minutes because I discovered something here in Yad Vashem I didn't know before. But as soon as the Jews were sent away, the first deportations in Slovakia took place after Purim 1942. They were sent to Auschwitz. At that time, Auschwitz was not known, and it was certainly not known as a death camp. It was a time when the Slovak Jews were first sent there, 1,000 Jewish girls, and then others. They began broadening Auschwitz and creating a death camp, which they utilized to the fullest extent when Hungarian Jewry was deported there. Rabbi Weissmandl immediately tried to discover where they were sent. He didn't know about Auschwitz at the time. He didn't know where they were sent, whether it was to Lublin for some people. He finally found out some of the Slovak Jews were sent to Lublin. He organized food packages to be sent, money to be sent, medicines to be sent. As soon as he found out about Jews in trouble, he immediately sought to alleviate their problems, to help them out in any way possible. And of course, when after 60,000 Slovak Jews were deported, he came across the idea, well, maybe we can use the good old Jewish method. Perhaps the Germans can be bribed. And Dieter Wislicenny, the SS man in charge of Weissmandl's final solution, Slovakia was in charge of deporting Slovak Jews. And Weissmandl used the intermediary. I won't go into the long story, but one person who used to speak to Wislicenny on behalf of Weissmandl told me, because his name was Andrei Steiner, the engineer, who was a total secularist Jew, said Weissmandl told him what to say to Wislicenny. He told him what Wislicenny will answer him. He told him what to answer back and what Wislicenny answered back to. He told him the entire dialogue, and Steiner told me it's exactly what happened. This man knew exactly what the entire conversation would be. He was able to direct it. To the end of his life, he regretted not having gone directly to Wislicenny himself. Steiner was a bright man, but he was not a Weissmandl. But Steiner told me, I said, I didn't know anything about Weissmandl, I didn't know anything about Judaism, but he first met him when Steiner was designing the labor camps for Slovak Jews. And Weissmandl asked me to provide kosher for the frum Jews. I didn't know what kosher meant either. But he looked at me with his eyes and he had me bewitched. Anything he asked me, I did. The man was incredibly charismatic and bewitching, and whatever the man said he followed to the T. And so Weissmandl was trying to rescue Slovak Jews. He had a very difficult time getting Jews to pay the $50,000, which was a lot of money those days, but it was not 50 million. And Jews were not ready to pay the money, not because they were cheap, because it was illegal. They wanted American money. Why did Himmler want to make a deal? Because part of the reason was they wanted to have connections with the Jews who control, Jews control the world. America, Britain, and the rest of the world. If you didn't know about it, I'll tell you the news. It's written in a little book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. We Jews control everything. Just read the Arabic edition. It's still being published. At any rate, the Germans wanted the connection to world Jewry. They wanted American money. He was able to raise the first $25,000 with a man by the name of Shlomo Stern, who lived in London. Some of you may have known him. He had a son, Rudy Stern. And he was a currency dealer, and he told me that he dug up the money from the ground, literally. They washed it all night and ironed it so it looked like new bills, American dollars. It was illegal to have American dollars. And when he asked Hungarian Jewry to provide a second $25,000 to ransom the last 22,000 Slovak Jews, they didn't want to give it because it was illegal. They didn't want to get into trouble. And Rabbi Weissmandl on Yom Kippur had to send 3 cables to Hungarian Jewry to the top 3 leaders, Count Frankel, the Sutton Rebbe, the Retzinerov, that you're going to have responsible to Bezin Shalmalo for not, we got the wording, taking care of the situation, whatever it is, whatever code you use, for not sending the money. And the next day, the Orthodox Jews risked the rest to bring the $25,000 US to Slovakia, and the ransom worked until October 1944. When the peasant uprising and Jews joining the uprising, then the Nazis arrested whomever they could find, and so that was a separate parsha we won't go into. But Rabbi Weissmandl was extremely involved in trying to urge the Jews. He tried, after he succeeded in ransoming the balance of Slovak Jewry in 1942, he thought broader, perhaps we can save the other Jews under Nazi occupation. And he created what's called the Europa Plan. And the Europa Plan, he made negotiations for $2 million, not like $2 million today, of course, far more, but nevertheless, it was not an unheard of sum. They could ransom the rest of European Jewry except for Polish Jews. And so he tried to get the money. Could not succeed in getting American or English or all the other free world Jews to pay that plan. Especially, most Jews didn't believe it would succeed. Others thought it was a trick. He couldn't even get, and the terrible thing about it is, everything worked on a piecemeal basis. If you gave the down payment of $200,000, you would get X number of Jews. The next $200,000, you get another shipment of Jews. It always worked that way. At least try the first $200,000, and if it doesn't work, say you tried and it didn't work. Tragically, the Jews in the United States, all the Jews, and I mean the from Jews and not from Jews, you name it, nobody took that seriously. Tragically. Jews in Eretz Yisrael certainly didn't take it seriously. In fact, the secular Jews thought it was all a trick. And tragically, the Europa Plan fell through. But with the occupation of Hungary on March 19, 1944, a new parsha opened up in the final solution. The last group of Jews living in relatively normal fashion, the 800,000 or so Jews living in Hungary, were now in danger. The first thing, Weissmandl, he still didn't know about Auschwitz. He had various reports, and he sent reports all the reports he could gather. There was no Auschwitz report at that time. There was 2 escapees, we'll discuss in a moment, that came in April. So he sent these reports immediately, the first day after occupation, to the Jews in the border town, I forget the name of the town in Hungary. And but the first thing happened is the Russia called, looked at it, and he said, that's impossible. And he showed it to the SS man. Because the SS man said, it's impossible, it's nonsense, and he shot the man, and he killed the Jews. Weissmandl tried immediately to warn the Jews. Next, we have the story of the 2 escapees from the Auschwitz, the enlarged Auschwitz, created by German efficiency into a death camp that could take as many as 15,000 a day and burn them to death. Only modern technology and the German mind could figure that one out. And they started to using all experience they had in deporting and ghettoizing, deporting, and mass murdering Polish and other Jewries. They now had enough expertise. So within weeks, they mass murdered 500,000 Hungarian Jews. And Weissmandl, the mass deportations from Hungary occurred on May 15th. May 16th, and I interviewed Nathan Schwal, head of Hechalutz in Switzerland, about 10 years ago. He was alive then. And he told me the next day, May 16th, he got from Rabbi Weissmandl 2 reports. A 33-page Auschwitz report, which was based on the interrogation of those 2 escapees, Werber and Wetzler. One of them is still alive, Werber, Professor Werber, 2 Slovak Jews. They were interrogated. Rabbi Weissmandl, by the way, I forgot to mention, he was the head of the Slovak Jewish underground. He and Gysi Fleischman, technically she was the head. In reality, he was, and all the ideas were his. He was the genius of rescue. And so he created a 33-page of Andre Steiner's houses where the report was typed up. all a clinical, objective, detailed report of what happened to Jews in Auschwitz. And that report was summarized by Rabbi Weissmandl in a 5-page Hebrew version, to which he attached his famous plea to bomb Auschwitz and other ideas, suggestions to the Allies. And these 2 reports were sent to Nathan Schwab and 3 other groups in Switzerland, or in other words, all the different factions, not only to the Orthodox. Schwab was certainly not Orthodox. He came with the Chalutz, the pioneer youth groups. And he immediately, and you have to give him a lot of credit, overnight translated both reports, the 5-page summary and the 33-page report, into German, typed them on a stationery dated May 17th, and he gave me copies of those 2 reports. And he told me within 48 hours, he sent those 2 reports to all the Zionist organizations in New York, in London, Istanbul, and Jerusalem. I found a reflection already in New York. I'm still looking in London. I know in Yerushalayim, I found 11 copies of the Auschwitz report when the Jewish Agency building had these Zionist archives in the basement. They moved around to the Central Zionist Archives. They are no longer there. You look for the Kastner trial, which I looked at 2 weeks ago. The Kastner trial, the details are all there, but none of the documents are there. Disappeared. They're not around. At any rate, so I have copies. You may have heard of Professor Bauer, one of the world's top foremost authorities on the Holocaust. In his new book, he said, the Auschwitz report came to Switzerland late June. And he had an office in the Yad Vashem right across the hall from me. I was there the last 5 months. And I said, I have news for you. I have some documents to show you. And I showed him Schwab's documents. This is not from the Orthodox. You can't tell me it's an Orthodox business. And I showed him today. I said, well, I'm going to have to change it for my next book. I'll have to report that it came a month earlier. And not only Nathan Schwab, they all got it. And tragically, nobody did anything about it. Nobody tried to get together and even describe it in the newspapers. My last book, The Man Who Stopped the Trains to Auschwitz, called, subtitled, George Montello, El Salvador and Switzerland's Finest Hour, forgot to bring the book naturally, shows the Swiss people were extraordinary, and the Swiss people made outstanding publicity about Auschwitz, condemning Auschwitz, telling what Auschwitz was, condemning the Nazis and the Hungarian complicity, and they made Auschwitz a household word, and the pressure revoked the response by the Western leaders, Churchill, Roosevelt, King of Sweden, the Pope, and so on, and pressured Horthy of Hungary into stopping deportations. What I found out recently in the Yad Vashem was, it was Weissmandl's version that had come to Switzerland, which was publicized at the end of June. The ones I mentioned to you after May 17th was never publicized. It was George Montello, the Jewish diplomat of El Salvador, who instigated and orchestrated a Swiss press and church campaign, the likes of which the world had never seen, and that made Auschwitz a household word, and it pressured Horthy into stopping deportations. Then Wallenberg was sent, and then others, and they did a great job later in the fall of '44. But that's a different parsha. It was Weissmandl's version that the Swiss people publicized and was the instrument for stopping deportations that eventually saved 140,000 Jews in Budapest. Tragically, Weissmandl never knew that. And I only found out several weeks ago. But Weissmandl was the genius of rescue who tried every possible idea. The Kastner train you may have heard of, which Kastner organized for 600 Zionists. It was not for everybody. Let me make that clear. It was 600 Zionists for that train. And Kastner's father-in-law, Mr. Fisher, suggested he take the Satmar Rebbe on as well. And he did. He took on the Satmar Rebbe. And what happened was, when the Eichmann demanded $2 million, and these are the least people able to pay, he had to open up the train to anybody could pay. My father-in-law paid for 4 people, his wife and his 2 children, one of them my wife, were on that train. So they paid $2 million in goods, you know, jewelry, diamonds, etc. And that train was eventually opened up, became 1,200, and then later 1,700. I won't go into details now. That train was ransomed by the Frum people, not by anybody else, not by Kastner, not by the Joint, but by Sternbuch. But the idea came from Weissmandl. That's the last thing I'll say about him. It was his idea. The Nazis wanted to drop everything, all negotiations. So Weissmandl had an idea. He had a typewriter sent to him from Switzerland with Swiss stationery, and he created a character called Ferdinand Roth. And he said, there are 300 trucks for you in Switzerland available, and through Freudiger in Hungary, through Sternbuch in Switzerland, through New York, Valhalla, they notified the Germans that they have 300 trucks. And that turned into tractors because the Nazis needed tractors for the fall harvest, which they didn't have. And it was the pressure by the Valhalla, the Orthodox Valhalla, to have the payment made for the train that eventually got it released, first 300 in August and 13 more hundred in December in Hanukkah 1944, on which the Satmar Rebbe was there, and the Betzinerov and my wife and her family were released to Switzerland. And that was also at the instigation of one of Rabbi Weissmandl's ideas. This is the man who created the codes, which was just an incidental little thing. It was like a toy with him to play with. And that genius, who was a multifaceted genius, his biggest thing was his Jewish heart. And that's the greatest attribute we can have for Rabbi Weissmandl, the creator of many ideas. Okay. Well, saving the ones he could do most with, that's the orphans. And he specialized in taking children out. He sought orphans wherever he could in convents. He had lists and letters and whatnot. And he identified them. And at one point, there was an assassination plot against Schoenfeld.